184 seconds. 3 minutes and 4 seconds. Thomas Massie held a series of international wire transfer receipts above his head and asked the question that would silence the chamber. Mr. Miller, between April and June of this year, $3.8 billion was transferred from the DHS Emergency Response Continuity Fund to 7 different offshore accounts: Singapore, Switzerland, Luxembourg, the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, the Bahamas, and Dubai. 7 countries, $3.8 billion. And every single receiving account was registered to a shell company that was dissolved within 90 days of receiving the money. So I have a very simple question. Where is $3.8 billion? Miller's face went completely still, not pale, not shocked, still. Like someone who just realized the paper trail he thought was buried had just been laid out in front of Congress. His lead attorney's hand froze on his legal pad. His second attorney pushed her chair back slightly, as though creating physical distance might somehow help. And Massie, the congressman who has traced more financial fraud than anyone else on that committee, had not even mentioned the beneficial ownership records yet. The hearing was listed as oversight of DHS emergency fund management and international transaction compliance. Another carefully chosen, boring title. It did not work. Every financial crimes reporter, every investigative journalist who covers offshore banking, every expert who tracks money laundering had someone in that room. Because when Massie schedules a hearing about emergency funds and the subpoena references international wire transfers, everyone who follows money knows someone is about to get caught. Miller arrived composed but tired. His legal team the same, prepared but worn down, like they had been fighting subpoenas for weeks and knew today was the day everything came out. Massie was already seated, a thick binder in front of him. Bank statements visible on top, wire transfer confirmations, routing number spreadsheets, the kind of financial documentation that cannot be explained away. The first 35 minutes were standard. Miller gave competent answers. He cited compliance frameworks. He looked almost comfortable. Then Massie took the microphone and the room temperature dropped. Mr. Miller. His voice was calm and methodical. I want to talk about the DHS Emergency Response Continuity Fund, established in 2019 to ensure continuity of operations during national emergencies. The fund is supposed to maintain a reserve of approximately $2 billion for rapid deployment during crisis. He opened the binder. According to Treasury Department records, as of March 31st of this year, the fund balance was $4.1 billion, above the target reserve, which is actually good financial management. But then something interesting happened. Between April 1st and June 30th, 3 months, the fund balance dropped to $300 million. He looked up. $3.8 billion left the fund in 3 months. That is not crisis deployment. That is evacuation. He pulled out the first document, April 14th. $620 million sent from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York on behalf of DHS to Meridian Solutions Pte. Limited, registered in Singapore. April 28th. $540 million to Alpine Strategic Holdings AG, registered in Switzerland, May 12th. $480 million to Horizon Capital Services SA, Luxembourg, May 23rd. $390 million to Caribbean Development Partners, Cayman Islands, June 6th. $510 million to Atlantic Ventures Holdings, British Virgin Islands, June 17th. $430 million to Nassau Financial Solutions, Bahamas, June 29th. $830 million to Gulf Strategic Investments, Dubai. He spread them all out on the table. 7 wire transfers. 7 offshore financial centers. Total, $3.8 billion. Mr. Miller, you are the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. Emergency fund authorizations over $100 million require your signature. So I am going to ask you directly. Where did $3.8 billion go? The room went silent. Not the polite quiet of people waiting for context. The heavy silence of people who just heard something that sounds like the largest money laundering operation in DHS history. Massie continued without pausing. Now I know what you were going to say. Maybe these were legitimate emergency contractors. Maybe they were classified operations. Maybe there is a reasonable explanation. He pulled out another document. So I did what I always do. I traced the companies. Meridian Solutions Pte. Limited, incorporated in Singapore on March 27th, 18 days before receiving $620 million, no employees, no physical office, no business operations, and on July 15th. 46 days after receiving the money, Meridian Solutions was dissolved, voluntarily. The company existed for less than 4 months, received $620 million, then ceased to exist. He pulled out more corporate records. Alpine Strategic Holdings, incorporated March 30th, received $540 million, dissolved July 22nd. Horizon Capital Services, incorporated April 3rd, received $480 million, dissolved July 18th. He went through all 7. Every single company incorporated within weeks of receiving money. Every single company dissolved within weeks of the transfer. All 7 existed for an average of 87 days. He set the papers down. Mr. Miller. $3.8 billion went to companies that did not exist before the transfers and do not exist anymore. Who received the money? Miller's attorney tried to intervene. International financial operations involve confidential commercial arrangements. The companies were dissolved. Massie's voice stayed level. There is no confidential arrangement. These companies existed for less than 4 months each. They received $3.8 billion. Then they disappeared. That is not a confidential arrangement. That is a shell game. He pulled out banking transaction logs. And here is where it gets interesting. I subpoenaed the banking records for all 7 accounts, and I found something remarkable. Every single account received its transfer from DHS, held the money for less than 72 hours, then moved it again. Meridian Solutions in Singapore received $620 million on April 14th. On April 16th, 48 hours later, transferred the entire amount to 3 different accounts. $240 million to Hong Kong, $190 million to the UAE, $190 million to Panama. He went through all 7. Every company, every transfer. Money received from DHS held for 24 to 72 hours, then immediately transferred to secondary offshore accounts. He looked at Miller. $3.8 billion sent to 7 shell companies, which immediately moved the money to 23 additional offshore accounts. Someone built a multi-layer offshore structure specifically designed to make $3.8 billion impossible to trace. Mr. Miller. Who built that structure? Miller opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His attorney whispered something urgent. Miller shook his head, and that is when the silence started. Massie pulled out his phone, opened the stopwatch, held it up. Mr. Miller, I have done this before. I know what silence means, but I am going to time it anyway, because the American people deserve to know how long you will sit here protecting whoever stole $3.8 billion. He pressed start. 10 seconds. Miller's hands flat on the table. 20 seconds. His attorney writing frantically. 30 seconds. 40. Miller said nothing. 50 seconds. Massie stood up, still holding the stopwatch. Mr. Miller, I have traced money for 20 years. I know what legitimate international transactions look like, and I know what money laundering looks like. This is money laundering. He walked toward the witness table. $3.8 billion moved through 30 offshore accounts in less than 90 days. Every company dissolved. Every trail deliberately obscured. Someone planned this. Someone executed it. And your signature is on the authorization forms. 60 seconds. 1 full minute. Where is $3.8 billion? 70 seconds. The committee chairman spoke. Mr. Miller, this is federal money. Emergency funds meant for crisis response, and you are sitting here unable to explain why it went to offshore shell companies that immediately dissolved. 80 seconds. Miller's jaw clenched. 90 seconds. Massie checked the stopwatch. 1.5 minutes. Mr. Miller, let me tell you something else I found. I did not stop at the secondary accounts. I went further. I traced the beneficial ownership records. 100 seconds. Those 23 secondary accounts. They are not owned by 23 different people. They are controlled by 5 trusts. 5 offshore trusts that share the same trustee service. 110 seconds. The same people control all 23 accounts. The same people received all $3.8 billion. 120 seconds. 2 full minutes. And those 5 trusts were all established in March of this year. 1 month before you signed the first wire authorization. 130 seconds. Someone set up 5 offshore trusts, created 7 shell companies, prepared 23 receiving accounts, and then you authorized $3.8 billion to flow through the entire structure. 140 seconds. That is not emergency funding. That is organized financial crime. 150 seconds. 2.5 minutes. Massie stopped walking. Mr. Miller, I am going to count to 184. And then every wire transfer, every corporate record, every banking log goes into the congressional record. And I'm going to refer this to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation. Because what you authorized is not policy. It is theft. 160, 165, 170, 175, 180, 181, 182, 183, 184. He stopped the timer. 3 minutes and 4 seconds. He turned to the committee. Mr. Chairman, the witness has refused to answer. I move to enter all banking records, wire transfer confirmations, and beneficial ownership documents into the congressional record. I further move to refer this matter immediately to the Department of Justice for investigation under federal money laundering statutes. Both motions were seconded. Both passed unanimously. Massie gathered his documents. He looked at Miller directly. 184 seconds. That is how long you sat here protecting whoever received $3.8 billion. But here is what you need to understand. Wire transfers create records. Banks keep logs. Corporate registries track ownership. And I have all of it. 7 shell companies. 23 offshore accounts. 5 controlling trusts. Every wire transfer. Every routing number. Every corporate dissolution date. All documented. All entered into the record. All referred to federal prosecutors. You spent 184 seconds thinking silence would protect you. But money trails do not disappear. And $3.8 billion leaves a very large trail. What Massie built in that room was not just a financial case. It was a structural one. The 7 shell companies were not random. They were incorporated in sequence, weeks before the transfers, in 7 different offshore jurisdictions chosen specifically because each provides a different layer of secrecy. The 23 secondary accounts were not random. They were controlled by 5 trusts established a month before the first authorization, meaning someone had prepared the entire receiving infrastructure before the first dollar moved. The dissolutions were not random. Every company was wound up within 90 days, erasing the corporate layer before anyone could serve process or request records. This was not improvised. It was engineered. The engineering is what distinguishes this from ordinary financial misconduct. Ordinary misconduct leaves loose ends. An unexpected audit, a staffer who asks the wrong question, a wire that gets flagged at the compliance level. What Massie documented was a structure designed to eliminate loose ends. Offshore jurisdictions with strong secrecy laws, immediate secondary transfers to prevent asset tracing, beneficial ownership hidden behind layers of trusts, corporate entities dissolved before they could become the subjects of legal proceedings. The only thing the structure's architect did not account for was a congressional subpoena that reached the banking records before the secondary accounts could be closed. Massie's signature on the authorization forms is in the record. The 7 wire transfers are in the record. The corporate incorporation and dissolution dates are in the record. The secondary transfers to 23 accounts are in the record. The 5 controlling trusts are in the record. And 184 seconds of silence from the man who signed every authorization is in the record alongside all of them. Right next to the question that still has no answer. Where is $3.8 billion? Not because the documentation is insufficient, because the man who signed the authorizations looked at the documentation, looked at the question, and chose silence for 3 minutes and 4 seconds instead. That silence is an answer, not to where the money went, but to whether the man who sent it is willing to say.